My happy place is that Lindsay's family has some property in East Texas it's my go-to place. Like, I'd rather go there than go on a trip around the world. I know that sounds ridiculous, but there's something about the East Texas piney woods that just speaks to my soul. Some of y'all get it. Some of you. It's a hidden gem of Texas, people. Do you not know about East Texas? I know there's some weird folks over there, but the land is beautiful, all right? Some of you are like, I'm from East Texas. But this property, with the busyness of life, we can go there and it all just slows down. You know, there's a lot of acreage. Everybody around them has a lot of acreage. And so it's just this beautiful, like, winding down. But one of my favorite things to do is to walk in the woods and just explore. We found a cave the other day. Not the other day. It was probably in Christmas time. But we found it seems like it was the other day. No, it's spring break, all right? So I'm not that far off, people. But we found a cave in the middle of this creek, an incredible experience walking around. But one thing that I noticed, I was walking around the property and I was doing what they call shed hunting. Some of y'all are like, I have no clue what that is. You're looking for the little she sheds? No, I'm looking for antlers that have fallen off of deer that are around the property. And so I'm walking around in the woods, and on one side of the property, there's a creek that runs the entire length of the property. And I noticed that there was this tree that had fallen across the creek and it was touching on both sides. And instantly I became a 10-year-old boy filled with wonder and curiosity. I'm like, this is it. This is my moment. No one's out here. No one can tell me no. Which if you have a personality like me, like you're okay with the gray area of life, anybody there? You're like, this kind of feels a little edgy, but it's okay. So what happened is I got up on this tree that's crossing the creek, touching on both sides, and my wonder and my curiosity was quickly squashed by the thought, what if this tree cracks in half when I'm in the middle of it? What if this tree cracks if I'm gonna try to cross this thing and nobody's out here? I mean, I'm deep in the woods. No scream, they're not gonna hear it, right? My cell phone's gonna be ruined because it's gonna be in the water. Like all the logical things start coming into my mind. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm okay. I'm not gonna cross this creek. This is a window into the faith of many believers. We get filled with wonder about the power of God and the work of God in our lives. We get filled with awe and wonder. And then what happens is when life requires us to step out on the limb of faith, we see that our faith is not as strong as we thought it was. You know, each of us in this room as humans, we have a bias towards ourselves. We tend to think the best about ourselves. And that includes our faith, where we might not be as strong in some areas, but we tell ourselves, I'm a man or a woman of faith. I've got all the faith in the world. The Lord can move mountains because I've got faith. And then life happens, and then you find yourself questioning, I thought that I was a person of faith. Has anybody been there before? This is not a new thing. We're gonna see this in our passage today, Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. If you have your Bibles, turn there with me, and it'll be on the screen as well. And if you're new at this, we study out of the ESV version. Listen to what it says in verse 14. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, what are you arguing about with them? And someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him on the ground, and he foams and grinds his teeth, and he becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able to. Verse 19, and he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell to the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. and it has often cast them into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for the one who believes." And immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, but help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand, and he lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, Why, Lord, could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." Really long passage this morning. And anytime you talk about the spirit world, people tend to get a little bit uneasy, and I get that, I understand that. But there is a reality of the darkness of the kingdom of evil that is still in our world today. We are aware of that, are we not? There is a darkness in our world. It's not new to the time of Jesus. It's not new to the time of us. There has been a spirit of darkness around the world since its inception, since its creation. And so we read passages like this, but when you think about it, what would happen in most American churches if someone that was affected by a demon walked through the doors and started having an episode like this? Most would probably have security usher him to the parking lot, call the cops, or we don't have to call the cops because we have the cops here, just in case if any of you get out of hand. We'd have them taken away, right? Like that's the reality of most churches in America. But we have to be discerning in our spirit and our spirit life to be able to say, is this something that is spiritual or is this something that is physical? And then we have to decide which way to go, and then we have to walk with people through those things. That's the reality of the spirit world. And so people get really uncomfortable. I get it, but there's nothing to worry about, because if you've trusted in Jesus, you have nothing to worry about. Couple amens, okay, all right. Some of you are like, you're gonna have to keep preaching to convince me. So this is a really long passage. We're gonna do our best to work through it, but I wanna simplify it for us a little bit. If you could put this passage down into one word, it would be this: faith. This entire passage, 15 verses, is about faith. That's it. And so keep that in mind as we break this down this morning. Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 16. And when Jesus came to the disciples, and Jesus, James, Peter, and John, they saw a great crowd around them and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about?" What are you arguing about? This kind of carries the tone of like a father that walks into the room, a mother that walks into the room, and it's like, "What are y'all doing?" Like it kind of has that feeling, what the words of Jesus here. But an interesting note here is we've been talking a lot about the mountaintop experience, about how all these incredible things throughout the scriptures have happened on the mountaintop, right? The disciples, Peter, James, and John, with Jesus, go up to the mount. They have this incredible experience of the transfiguration where Jesus is transformed before them, and they see Moses and Elijah, the proclamation of Jesus that I am the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and I am the longed Messiah that you've been looking for generations. They come down from the mountaintop experience right into a testing or a fight. Now, I want you to think about in the scriptures, a lot of times, immediately following the mountaintop experience is a testing. We like to talk a lot about those mountaintop experiences and like, I'm on a spiritual high, like that camp feeling that I had when I was a teenager, I'm there, like I'm living it out. But the reality is those things only last so long, and then usually immediately after that mountaintop experience, it leads right into a testing. We see it with Moses. He goes up to the mount, he receives the 10 commandments. He's fired up about the people of God, and he comes down, marching down with these stone tablets to what? Not the people in eager anticipation of Yahweh. He comes down to the people worshiping a golden calf. I mean, testing immediately. We see it with Jesus. Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist, the clearest biblical example of the Trinity in one passage, the Father, Son, and Spirit in one moment. Jesus is baptized, the Lord speaks, the dove comes down, and God says, this is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. Great mountaintop experience, like the heavens open up and God speaks audibly. Where does Jesus go in the next passage? Right into the desert in the wilderness for the temptation. And so typical rhythm is that when we have those mountaintop experiences, it's usually going to be followed up by temptation or difficult seasons. I know for me, like, I used to say I need to be careful about what I preach because when I preach it, I'm going to be tested on it. It's just the reality of life, isn't it? Now, so these disciples have this experience. They're confronted with groups of people arguing with each other and a demon-possessed boy. There's a lot of stuff happening in this passage. And in the middle of this argument, as Jesus and the three disciples join him, Mark says they were astonished or greatly amazed, depending on your translation, astonished or greatly amazed. Now, we don't really have the English word to really convey what the Greek says here, because the Greek conveys a feeling of trembling or of being on the edge, like walking into the situation on edge. Like when we think of greatly amazed, we're running to Jesus like frolicking through flowers. No, it's like fear and trembling that we're running towards him like, this is different. There's a fear, there's an awe, there's a wonder in what these disciples and the crowds are experiencing here. And this same crowd is the crowd that has been following Jesus in his time in the Sea of Galilee, the scribes, the Pharisees, the disciples, and just the at-large crowd that is trying to get an experience of what the kingdom is like. Now, I don't want to make too much of this. I'm not saying you need to write a theology book on this one verse or one thought of this verse, but I do find it interesting that in the crowds that are following Jesus, it is always the religious leaders that are arguing and fighting with the work of God. It is always the religious leaders that are arguing and fighting with the kingdom and the work of God. Now, for those of you that grew up in church, you're like, I get it. It makes sense. Because you've had some experiences in the churches that you've been in your life that you're like, can we just get along? Do we have to argue about such silly things like paint colors? Or the changing of a name of a ministry where people get mad and they want to leave their church because like, well, my grandmother gave money to that ministry. No, the reality is when your grandmother gave money to that ministry, it was no longer her money, but it was the Lord's money. And so they fight over silly and minute things when they shouldn't. And so I see this group of people following Jesus arguing, and it's usually the religious leaders that are the ones that are causing the friction. Because here's the thing, when we take our eyes off of the mission that God has given us and we start focusing horizontally, that is when we start to bicker and argue and fight. When we take our eyes off of the mission, like we are here as a church to guide generations to become everyday followers of Jesus. That is our goal, to wake up the suburbs of our city around us, the communities around us that live the suburb life and drive home from work, park their car in the garage, and they consider church to be something like their kids' baseball schedule. It's just something that we do. We want to wake people up to be, hey, it's not just Sunday, it's Monday through Sunday. Every single day. And when we take our eyes off of the vision and we start paying attention to things like, well, I just sure wish they'd have different donuts on Sunday morning. I wish they had could you get the maple glaze instead of the regular glaze? Because I just really enjoy that. No. I worked at a church for 6 years that we did donuts. And I always said I would never have donuts at our church. And then somebody, when we were at the school, said, hey, our church needs donuts. I'll pay for the donuts. And I was like, great. Shouldn't have done that. Next verse. 9, verse 17 and 18. And someone from the crowd answered him, teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him on the ground, and he foams, and he grinds his teeth, and he becomes rigid. And so I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able to. This shows the desperation of the father. I can only imagine what this father is experiencing. We don't know much about the father other than he's willing to be publicly shamed or rebuked or whatever for the sake of his son, right? Like Jesus walks up to the disciples as they're arguing with the scribes and the people in the crowd, and he's like, what are you arguing about? And this desperate father shouts out, teacher, I brought my son to you, but your disciples couldn't cast this demon out of him. And so this scene describes a nightmare scenario for every single parent, something that is out of your hands regarding your children. He'd go into seizures, it would keep him mute, it'd throw him on the ground, it'd throw him into fire and water. Felt like it is out of his hands. And here's the truth that I want you to get out of this. It may have been out of the hands of the Father, but it was never out of the hands of the Lord. It was never out of the hands of Jesus. It may have been out of the hands of the Father. Nothing he could do about it, nothing he could control or make something happen, but Jesus had it fully in his hands every moment. And all throughout our life, we are confronted with situations that are out of our hands. A sickness, a sudden death, a diagnosis. And the truth that one of the truths I want you to leave with you today, or want you to leave with today, is that it's never out of the hands of our Savior. It may feel like it is out of control right now. It may feel like that the Lord has forgotten you and all the things, right? We see that throughout the scriptures in the Psalms, David writing, Lord, why have you forgotten me? Honesty and raw prayers, all of these things that we're experiencing in life, like the Lord knows them. It matters to him. He cares for him. And you need to know that it's in his hands. Look at verse 19 through 22. And he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you to bring him to me? So he says to the people, bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at his mouth. I would love to be a fly on the wall in a home with the scribes after this moment. Like, what were they thinking in that moment when this demon starts manifesting itself just by Jesus' presence? And Jesus asked the Father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And it has often cast him into the fire, into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Oh, faithless generation. Faithless generation. You know, there are people that wonder why God does not move the way that he moved in the New Testament church, the first century church or the early church, as he does today. But the reality is God does move like that. It's not usually in America. Could it be because we live such self-sufficient lives that we don't have full reliance on the Creator? Could it be that we live so connected to the world around us all the time at our fingertips and figuring out solutions? Like here's the world we live in now. If you can't figure your life out, ChatGPT can do it for you, right? Like that's the world that we know and live by now. Faithless generation. This is a rebuke of the crowd and the disciples. And I would imagine if Jesus was to be in flesh and bone in America, in the Western church, he would say the same statement, O faithless generation. Jesus knows he would not be with the disciples with them much longer in the flesh. And at some point, the disciples are going to have to figure it out. They're going to have to figure out this kingdom of God. And in the meantime, Jesus asks them, hey, bring the boy to me. You ever heard the saying, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself? Has a little bit of that, right? The reality is, Jesus is using this for a teaching moment. He's not like, hey, boys, let me show you how it's done. It's like not that kind of spirit in Jesus, right? We can't read it with that kind of lens. And he says, bring the boy to me. Jesus shows his power and authority clearly in this moment. And I want you to notice the words that are in this verse, in this passage. When they brought the boy to him, it says that the Spirit saw him and fell down before Jesus. Before Jesus even spoke a word, he didn't come out shouting like, bring that demon to me. Like, like there's an old rock Christian band called Demon Hunters. Was it Christian? I think it was. Maybe not. Don't look it up. All right, I need to look that up, but next service. Like he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to make a show. He didn't have to make an experience. Just his presence, being in the presence of a demon, the demon falls on his face before the Lord. There's no need for a circus kind of moment. Just his presence there shows that Jesus is already winning the battle with his authority and with his presence. The Father describes more of the effects of this demon, but I want you to notice the heart of Jesus here. Instead of focusing on like the fire and the water and the convulsing and the foaming of the mouth and grinding of teeth, I want you to notice the heart of Jesus here, because Jesus steps into the world of the Father. And I want to paint a clear picture for you of what the religious spirit that many people have, what does it get you? It gets you a group of people that are arguing while the one in need is just kneeling down, still in need. And so Jesus goes to the Father and asks him, how long has this been happening? Now, there is a part of me that kind of wonders here. I'm like, it's like, was this little boy like convulsing on the ground and Jesus is just having like a conversation with the man and like not like, there's a part of me that wonders. I'm like, how did that moment go? Like, what was the timeline there? Mark doesn't give it to us, but I find it interesting. That's where my brain goes, okay? Y'all need to pray for me. Jesus is not in a rush. He takes his time, not only ministering to the boy, but ministering to the Father. Because by Jesus asking the Father, hey, how long has this been happening? What Jesus is doing, Jesus already knows how long it's been happening. He knows all things. What he's doing is stepping into the world of humanity with the man and saying, I see what you're going through and I understand. Many times when people in our life are going through really difficult and challenging seasons, they don't need you to come up with a very, very specific line that's gonna make their life feel better, because the reality is you can't do it. What they need is just you to step into their world for a little bit. They need you to step in and see the humanity of their situation. And so Jesus does that. How long has this been happening? He has this conversation, this dialogue with the Father. And then the Father says one of the most honest prayers that you could ever find in the scriptures. But if you can, have compassion on us. It seems like many people feel like they have to say this perfect prayer with the right words, almost like you got to have a certain amount of Father Gods in your prayer for the Lord to hear you. And so we have to work ourselves up to perfect faith to go to the Lord. But all throughout the life of Jesus, he responds to what can seem like imperfect faith and prayers. Look at this. The Father's just like, if you can, I don't know if you can, could you just have compassion on us? That doesn't sound like somebody's like confident that the Lord's gonna move on their behalf. Like, hey, listen, Lord, you can do it. We're here, make it happen, like full of faith. No, God, if you can, could you just have compassion on us? Just broken prayer that this man prays to Jesus with this imperfect faith. And so I challenge you, you do not have to project yourself in a certain way to the Lord. You do not have to create this false sense of reality in your life to be able to go to the Lord. No, the Lord already knows what you're thinking and walking through. You can be honest and raw and transparent with him. In fact, I would say that the Lord would honor that kind of prayer over a one that is more performance than anything. Let's go to the Lord with honesty and rawness. We see it all throughout the Psalms. We see it through Lamentations where lament and frustration boil up over. It's this beautiful, beautiful thing that happens when you're honest with the Lord. Look at 23 and 24. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, but help my unbelief. It kind of sounds like an outrageous statement that Jesus says here. All things are possible for one that believes. I want to get some clarification here. This doesn't mean when you act dumb. I was trying to think of the best word. It's the best word I think I got. That's my level of intellect, okay? When you act dumb, doesn't mean that the Lord is going to rescue you from a situation. Like, I'm gonna move on because I'm gonna say something I shouldn't. See the spirit of self-control. Just pouring out of me. We have human limitations, don't we? You're not gonna jump off the roof of the church and then in the middle of the fall, like, Lord, save me. There are limitations to this experience, but this is about faith and believing that God can move on your behalf. And I think this is one of the most honest statements and prayers in all of the Bible. I believe, but help my unbelief. We have this version of Jesus in our minds that does not fit with the Jesus that we see in the Gospels, where we can't be totally honest with him. We hide our human emotions, try to clean ourselves up, and we present our prayers to him. But I want you to hear me. As it is true with this story, it is true with your life, is that your imperfect faith is enough for Jesus. Your imperfect faith is enough for Jesus. Your imperfect faith may feel a little bit like stepping out onto that tree that has fallen across the creek and taking a few steps, and then it starts to crack and kind of crackle, and you're like, okay, I believe, but not as much in this moment. I believe, but help my unbelief. The Father is holding two things in his hands at once, faith and doubt. Now, I know many of you did not grow up the way that I grew up, the charismatic world that I came out of growing up. I'm grateful for my upbringing. I have a great respect for the pastors that I had, all the things. It's not to talk bad about my upbringing. I had a great upbringing. But what I would say is this: there was such a focus on removing all doubt from your life, and that if the Lord didn't heal you, it's probably because you didn't believe enough. And it has caused so much pain and heartache in many lives of believers across our globe because, of course, the Lord wants to heal you. And so if he doesn't heal you, it's because you didn't believe enough and you didn't have the right faith. No, sometimes it's just that it wasn't in the will of the Father to make that happen in that moment. And I think the reality is many are afraid of the sovereignty of God. And so we explain it away by saying, well, it's your fault. Faith and doubt. We sometimes see faith as perfect belief, but what if faith is continuing to turn to God even in the middle of our struggle and doubt? What if faith is continually turning to God even in the middle of our struggle and doubt? What if God is just looking for our sincerity over projection? What if our prayers acknowledge our doubts instead of trying to hide them from the Lord? Look, verse 25 and 27. When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out of him, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. This is such a powerful little short part of this passage. I want you to notice that the crowd start running towards Jesus, and Jesus notices them running to this moment, and he quickly decides that the enemy does not get a stage in this moment. He doesn't get a microphone. He doesn't deserve a stage. He doesn't get any kind of recognition for his power. So we're not gonna have this like reality of like everybody's coming together, we're gonna watch the power of this demon. No, you don't even get a stage because you don't deserve one. So he casts this demon out. This boy is laying there like he's dead. This is, it feels kind of strange, but this is an object lesson for the disciples. It's an object lesson for the disciples. I want you to listen here. Soon, Jesus was going to be crucified on the cross. He'd face the reality of his death, and the world would assume his death. But little would the world know that just like Jesus takes the hand of this little boy, the Father would take the hand of his son and raise him up to new life again. See, every story in the Gospels is not just an isolated story to say, look how cool God is. It is connected and interconnected, woven together so neatly and tightly, you can't remove one from the other. This is a picture of Jesus' forthcoming resurrection, where the Father sees him in the depths of Hades and pulls him back to life. 28 through 29. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." Now, I just wonder what the disciples were thinking in that moment, because we see moments in the Gospels already where the disciples have prayed. They've prayed with Jesus. Jesus has commanded them to pray. Like, were the disciples just like, we don't need to do prayer because we've just been around Jesus? I don't think that would be the case. But he says that interesting line, this one only comes out by prayer. And I believe one of the other gospel accounts of this says that this one can only come out by prayer and fasting. This is the rhythm of the Gospels is that Jesus would do a miracle or a teaching, and then he would go to somewhere more private, a home or on the side of a mountain, and teach his disciples even more. And Mark, being the short nature that he has, he goes from Jesus pulling this young boy by the hand, and he raises, gives no extra detail, and then the very next verse, and the disciples were going into the house. You're like, what happened to the boy? Like, did he go run around in joy and shouting? Was the Father proclaiming God's power and majesty? Just, nope, Mark, we're going to the next verse. And the disciples were dumbfounded that they couldn't cast the demon out of this boy, and so they asked Jesus, why? And I would imagine that the answer to the question would have been confusing to the disciples. It only comes out by prayer. I heard it said this way, is that prayer is faith turned to God. Prayer is simply faith turned toward God. There's a couple plausible reasons for why the disciples couldn't cast the demons out. One is their level of personal prayer. Listen, your personal time with the Lord and praying to the Lord, it cannot be built on the backs of others. It has to be built in the heart through the work of the Spirit in you. And so, what these disciples needed was communion with God. They assumed that simply being around Jesus was enough. Now, thousands of years later, we've boiled it even down more to where we say just being around church is enough. Their personal prayer life, they had to take ownership of it. And Jesus is preparing his disciples for the time when he's going to be gone, because there's a lot riding on these 12 men. The birth of the church as we know it today was riding on these 12 men, and Jesus is trying to show them, I'm not gonna be here much longer. You have to take ownership of your relationship with the Lord, and you have to pray. You can't assume because you're with Jesus that you get to do the things that Jesus did. Second reason is that Jesus gives the disciples tasks out of their ability, out of the reach of their ability to teach them. So the lesson here is that the ministry of Jesus is not the disciples' ministry. The disciples are just an agent of Jesus' ministry. This is the work of Jesus, not their work. And the reality, it kind of brings the reality of their frailty, not to shame them, but to drive them deeper to prayer, belief, and reliance on the Lord. And the same goes for us, is that the Lord, not because he's trying to punish you, but because he's trying to teach you, will put you in situations that are out of your abilities so that you will learn the frailty of your human life and you will live in full dependence in who God is and what he has done for you. When we walk in faith, it is not to build our own confidence, but it is to show our weakness and his strength. We all have limitations. We all have certain lengths that we are able to go to in certain difficult times. But when you step out of your ability and you see your humanity in full view and you see God's power, it is a beautiful thing. And here's my question. Are we living a life that requires us to live in faith, or are we living a life that is so structured and ordered we could live our life just as well without faith? I think we have to wrestle with that question. Because if you are not being tested in your faith, I would say you're not actually following the kingdom of God. Faith is like walking out on the fallen tree that crosses the creek. It shows our weakness, but it shows his strength. I want you to bow your heads with me.